Hello, hello, hello. So yes, my name is Enrique Gersi. I'm a creative working in the live industry in content creation. As you know, Finn Ross was going to be speaking here today, but he couldn't, unfortunately, because of work. So I actually got a message last week inviting me to be part of this, which I was very excited about. I was already planning on attending. But I have to admit, I was at the tail end of my holiday, and the message caught me in a beach somewhere. So I didn't have much time to really think through about the title. So I came up with a pretty dry title that's called Real-Time Design and Workflow. So I'm going to try and make that a little bit more exciting now that the title is fixed. Maybe let's push it a little bit more. Yeah, that's starting to get there. Not real time, but it's feeling better. Now that I've had some more time to think about what I was going to chat with you guys about today, it feels really interesting and exciting to be here because, well, first of all, I know it's Framework's first physical meeting, which is really exciting. And also, because of the pandemic, for a lot of us, that was a very disruptive time for the industry. And at least for me and a lot of people that I work with, it feels like we've just been running since then, even as things have become normalized. It's been a really exciting time for real-time technology, real-time content making, but at the same time, I feel like, at least personally, there hasn't been that time to recap and just kind of breathe in and see where things are going, where things are at, how we're doing things, comparing and contrast. So being part of Framework for that is really, really good. And really interesting also after the previous talk of the whole history of real time. So yes, what will I be speaking about today? It will be my own experience of real-time content creation. I've been working in the live industry for the last 6-7 years. I'll speak a little bit more about background in a moment. But also how real-time technology is really helping with content making that's also rendered, not just real-time, how it's really bridging the gap between the physical, traditional, screen-based space, all the way to the virtual, extended reality, virtual productions, and the hybrids in between with augmented reality. So it's definitely a really exciting time to be talking about this. And this will be my own personal experience with this, as well as with some of the studios that I've been working with doing this. I'm a freelancer and a consultant. I've worked with some studios. Some of you are presenting here in the next couple of days. Some of them may be watching, and it's been a really good kind of trajectory so far. I've worked on bands like Coldplay. I've worked on Queen and Adam Lambert, J Balvin. I worked on the opening ceremony for the Expo as well. I've worked on a lot of different projects with various studios. For the last year, I've been working with Frey Studio mostly, which has been really great because they have a really developed toolkit for real-time, which they apply for both real-time projects and rendered projects. For my own practice, I create smaller scale projects that also incorporate these technologies. I'll collaborate with choreographers or musicians. I've also worked with commercial clients, and that includes extended reality projects. It includes real-time visuals that are being emanating from motion and some lighting design as well. Just gonna play a little bit of my reel there so that you see it. I mostly use Notch for real-time software. I've also worked with Unreal Engine, work a lot with a disguised workflow, also with Touch Designer, and work with traditional Adobe tools, and along the way trying to see how to mix and match those different tool sets in the best way possible. Let's see. And just very quickly, a little bit of my background, just to finalize on that, but I think it's relevant. I was really obsessed with things that were live when I was a kid. I loved working with technology back in the day. I won't say my age, but I was probably one of the first generations using the internet, like a lot of us here, potentially. I loved music and things like that, so I was really inspired by concerts of the 1980s and 1990s, that sort of very big scale concert. Then I became really into film and visuals, and that led me to study film, and I was working on visual effects for around 7 years. And I was in that generation that started doing the transition from standard definition to higher definition to HD. And also we incorporated some of the first digital cinema cameras. So it was the red camera. I think we have one of the first 300 at the company I was working with in the United States. And I was spearheading kind of the department of integrating that workflow at a visual effects studio. We were using also Flame Autodesk, which was a node-based system. So basically, I'm saying all this to say that the creative side, working with new technologies, has always been something that I've been interested in. And I think that's probably something that we all have in common. And I think that's what makes real-time technologies really exciting to be a part of. I'll be dividing what I'll be speaking about today in two parts. The first one will be how real-time technologies is elevating, it's expediting our design and creative process, how it's kind of bridging the teams into a more kind of efficient pipeline, how it's becoming less and less of a linear workflow as well. This has been done for many years now in different studios in different ways, but I think it's really becoming standardized now, and it feels like studios and studio owners and clients are more comfortable with implementing real-time technologies from the get-go, and everybody's starting to see the advantages of it without having to do having time for R&D or anything like that. So it's really becoming widespread. And as a part two, as an extension of that, there's a really exciting element to that real-time technologies is giving us, and that's how video design and lighting design are kind of being integrated more and more. Traditional lighting desks controlling virtual lights in screens, content, whether it's real-time, or different elements as well. And that's a really exciting collaboration that's kind of brewing between video designers and lighting designers. Again, this has been done in various projects throughout the years, but it's just becoming a lot more common now, and it's really making the process faster and expediting it more. And the projects that I will be talking about today will be a lot of the projects that I've been doing with Frey Studio, along with some that I have done. And there'll be projects that have happened since the pandemic until now. So yeah, the first part, enhancing and expediting the creative process. The first example I will discuss is Coldplay Music of the Spheres Tour, which I did with Frey Studios. I was the creative lead for this and also a notch artist. It was really exciting to be part of this. Frey was tasked with creating all the real-time content for the show. This included, I think, 20 to 30 looks for IMAX screens with a lot of revisions along the way. Some of them were more sophisticated. They had some like audio reactive elements or reactive elements. Some were just very beautiful grades. This was all made with Notch, by the way. I was collaborating and working a lot with a really amazing team, but especially with Kira O'Brien, who's great. She's part of Frey. In addition to that, we also created an interactive installation that would play at the beginning of the show. It would play a few times, and there were kinetic floors that were, there were 2 of them by the audience, and before the show started, people would jump on them, and they would emit energy, and this would create data that then would feed to the skies, and with a notch block that we would set up, it would display the data real time, and then eventually it would announce a winner of the stage right floor and the stage left floor. So that was made with Notch. So it was a really great application of real-time technology on this. And I'll just show a little video from people jumping around. Everybody got really into it, actually, and good exercise before the show. So yeah, and then the final bit that we worked on for this tour, I think it's a more specific one I wanted to discuss about. We also created the content for the final number of the tour for a song called Beautiful. And this was going to be a traditional rendered piece, which was going to play in the main central screen, and it was going to play on the spheres that were hanging from the sides, and then we would have the IMAX on the sides, as you can see. So the approach for this one was really interesting. It was very mixed tool set. We didn't have much time. I know we're all familiar with that concept here. And we needed to create something that was all generated in 3D. And thinking about the best tools to work with, Fred decided to do the majority of it with Unreal Engine in terms of the world making. Notch was used for the intro part, which was a very kind of particle-driven scene, as well as the UV mapping of the spherical content as well. And it really provided for a really kind of agile workflow. This was started with the client had a brief that they sent to us. Finn Ross and Adam Young kind of created the first proposal for this with some of the initial ideas, and a very talented designer, Laura Perret, started creating the first style frames. And once it was in motion, it was approved, I took it on as a creative lead, and I started developing the journey, the visual journey that would be from beginning to end of the song, and thinking about all the different screens and how that would all come together. I was collaborating with Norf Gennis. He works at Frey. He's a super talented 3D artist and real-time artist as well. Here's some of the initial boards, by the way. And the way that we would be working is, as Norf was creating and building the real world in Unreal Engine and modeling all the different elements, I would be going into Unreal Engine, kind of setting up cameras to tell our story. In this case, we were going from a very macro view, kind of wide view, and then starting to explore the different fauna and flowers that were around. I would go in there, and Norf was kind of doing his part, and I would be doing that. I would take those elements, then kind of thinking about the edit process, the editing of the piece, the finishing, the color correction. I would then send style frames to the client, eventually sending an animatic as well, and then eventually starting to post high-res versions so that they could see. And what was really beautiful about this is that we were able to work alongside each other in a less linear kind of pipeline, which made it really agile. It really made it really quick. And I think personally, I was able, and the team was able to kind of react to what we were outputting faster, which allowed for more iterations, and it allowed for more refinement. And I feel like for the client, it felt the same way too. He would be having different versions time and again, more recurrently, and then he could react to it more, and we could give that feedback to them. So here are some of the style frames as well. And then you start seeing it on stage. Another use of real time, as I was mentioning before, we use Notch for the kind of reformatting of the spherical content on the spheres with a very powerful UV camera that Notch has. And that just made it really simple and really quick to take all this content and format it in a really interesting way and add other elements that were kind of being displayed at the same time. But yeah, it was again, for the little time that we had, it really, really worked well in terms of pipeline. And if you think about it, it was at the end of it, just two of us. It was Norf and myself kind of producing a 4-minute multi-screen deliverable. And so again, I really think without real-time technology, without the fast rendering power of Unreal Engine and Notch, something like this would have had to be set up in a very different way. It would have had to be a lot more people. We would have had to have more time. So it was really, really, really brilliant to have that. Another project that I will speak about now is another Frey project that I worked on. This was a couple months ago. It's Azimuth powered by Middle Beast. This took place in Saudi Arabia in an area called Alula. I have a picture, I'll go back to this in a moment, but it's basically really, really massive rocks. And they were doing a festival in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. They had production glue come from the US, and they basically set everything up from scratch. We were tasked with creating all the visuals for the 2-day event. The visuals had to be running from dusk until dawn, so that's a lot of content. Again, I think I put it earlier on, the resolution was 13K, and we were talking about a 220-meter canvas alongside multiple rocks. We also weren't going to have enough time on site. I'm sure that sounds, again, very familiar. We didn't have a lot of time to produce this. I'm sure that sounds very familiar. But what we did have is our kind of toolkit and our experience at Frey of real-time workflow and content workflow. And from the very beginning, Finn and Adam said, let's do this real time. And they were absolutely right, because we were able to generate all these looks very, very quickly, run them through a disguised media server. There was no need to render and bring all those files with us. And any little revision, as you guys all know, would have taken a lot more to do it that way. These are some of the Notch previs. Again, this was all done in Notch. I think another way that real-time technologies really is helping this process is that for this project, I was the creative lead. I was a designer working with an amazing team. I was working with Kira O'Brien as well. But because we had so little time, as I was coming up with some of the kind of looks and style frames, then somebody else would take them on and start beginning. I would start looking at some more. But simultaneously, we were already doing prevising, which we would be sending to the client pretty much from the get-go, from like the first week or two. And then we would be getting feedback. At the same time, we were starting to almost program as well how we would expose those values to disguise. As you guys know very well, or some of you, you need to expose only the values that will really be useful for the programmer. You don't want to give them 100 things. You want to make them organized. So there is some sort of a pre-programming work that is done when you're doing real-time content creation from a creative side and from the Notch side. So we were thinking about that, what sort of values we wanted to expose along the way. Also, it's because we were working so quickly, I was coming up with kind of the journey from beginning to end each of the nights, how we could make each night different, how we would kind of incorporate the idea of dusk and dawn, astral bodies, and kind of all these different looks, how they would sequence one after the other and really make sense in the some other parts. And working in real time, if we had to think about rendering all this footage and potentially have more people involved. We're a team of 4 people working on this. I don't think we would have been able to experiment, to develop the different looks, to swap things around. There's another look as well. There's some of the disguise screen grabs as well. So yeah, here we are. This is in person. It was really really good to finally see it in person after working on it for 3 weeks, and we were only there for a few days. I think also I didn't mention that, and as you all know, working with Notch and real-time technology, we were able to previs this work with actual rocks that were scanned from the project. So it got us closer to seeing how the different content would look on the surface. It's not exactly there yet because the 3D scans were actually not exactly accurate because of the scale, but it really got us very close to see how they would visualize, which was extremely helpful for us. And then to also show the client, also see what sort of a content works better on rocks like this. I think the first hunch is to think something 3D, very 3D heavy will work, but I think textural things ended up working well, and having that quick workflow really allowed us to get there faster. Here are some of the pictures from on site. This was a collaboration with Cassius Creative. They were doing all the lighting design. And I'll speak a little bit more about this later, but we were able to give control to Disguise and also the lighting desk of controlling the colors in the actual content as well. So this allowed for us to reuse some of the looks, but make them feel different, not just with colors, but then with other parameters that we exposed. And that would mean if we had the same look for an hour, it would kind of evolve over time. And then if we used it for later on, because let's say an act kind of called for that look that we had already done, we had one with different numbers that were kind of showcasing the geometry. We could do it, but we could do it in a different way. So very flexible, very agile, very, it really allows the creativity to expand as you're on the spot, on site, and really thinking quick. This was a really particular project because usually we're used to queuing for theater or queuing for time code, but here we were pretty much kind of running the show live with Cassius Creative because we didn't have the time with this festival to go there and have the different acts and run through things. So it was a really, really great project to be a part of. And again, without real-time technology, it would have required more people, more time, more of everything. There's more looks as well. Just another example that I have here. This is for a project that I worked with another client. The project didn't, in the end, move forward with the client, so I'm not going to say which musician it is for, but there's some mouth moving, so if anybody's good at mouth reading, they might be able to figure it out. But this is just a really good example of, this was made in Unreal, and it's a really good example of animation that's done really, really quickly. I work with 3D, I work with 2D and all this, but I'm not good necessarily at rigging when it comes to mouth rigging, really intricate. This was done with MetaHuman in Unreal Engine, and I was able to, that's me performing, by the way, embarrassingly so, doing the first initial test anyways, of this virtual being mouthing the lyrics. And it's really interesting how it kind of really captures the movements of the face. It's really incredible. This was a year ago, so I'm sure there's some really crazy examples out there now. But again, for creativity, it really allowed me to do this, to kind of have the vision that I had of how I saw this done from the Give and Breathe, and that I could just quickly do it, get some first versions out, and I didn't have to spend all this time animating this, or have more people involved that would be able to, just to do some initial tests that potentially would change along the way. So again, real-time technologies are really helping us to, I think, expand and elevate the creative process. And I think that's really important to mention as well. It's in the creative discovery, as you guys know, you go somewhere and then you realize, okay, that's not where we need to go, let's go here. But you have to go through that journey and that exploration to kind of get there. And again, real-time content making is really helping with that. All right, a couple more examples from this first part that I wanted to mention. I think real-time technology is really helping us to reduce space and expand space. And the first example I will speak about will be a project that I did, that I directed during the pandemic. It's an XR concert for a musician called Baldo Verdu. This was funded by Arts Council. It was done in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. It was shot at Pop Lumen's Lumen Associate Studio at Milkit, which was really great to be there with the whole team. I collaborated with Doug Green on this, a great lighting designer as well. And why is this a way that we were able to expand space? Well, of course, we were in an extended reality setup, which was really fascinating to work on. We were extending the set and creating all these virtual worlds, which was really interesting. But something at the time then, I was really interested in investigating and kind of getting to how to bring live audiences together into the live stream, into the extended virtual environment. And so I was actually working with Kira O'Brien on this as well, and we devised a workflow of taking very simple Zoom, the Zoom call where the participants of the concert, the viewers of the concert, and then kind of curate different people that we would pick depending on what action they were doing or just by random, and integrate them into various places of the virtual environment. So we were kind of bringing people, you see it there on the upper right side. It was really interesting to bring people in there so that they could feel like they were part of the concert. And the kind of the idea was that the concert would start with Baldo performing in the middle of the ocean, and everything was kind of disintegrated, and then he went into these different spaces where the people were featured more and more, and it was kind of to reflect on what was happening then in the pandemic, that we were kind of moving towards different ways of performance and live shows. So it was really exciting to do this. It was just done with Notch, and it was done with this guys. And again, being able to use this technology, it really kind of allowed my creativity to think about an idea like that and be able to pursue it with really a small production that was Arts Council funded, which was really exciting. We were able to also take Baldo's image from a separate camera and put that into a kind of virtual iMac that you see behind, and this would be the same sort of elements where we would also display the audience members. And then during the intermission, Baldo would speak on the upper right. You see it to some of the participants as well. This was like a 4-set concert that we did. It was live streamed, so it was very ambitious at the time. But it was just really interesting to have everybody together in one space, be part of something, feel like we were part of something. And from the feedback I got, people were really happy to be able to do that at the time, at the middle of the pandemic. And for us, it was the team working on it. It was really amazing to be working on a project that actually would be seen and that people could be part of and participate. So that was great. Another example of how real-time technologies are helping our creative process, and I feel like they're also shrinking space in terms of collaboration, people working remotely in different places, is J Balvin for Nightmares. I work with Frey on this. I was a Notch artist on this. Link in LA was curating and making the whole show, and they had different studios make different parts. Frey did the first part, and I believe this was shot at XR Studios, and it was a really great project to be part of. This in 2020, again in the middle of the pandemic, and we were using Notch for this, and it was going to Disguise. And again, being able to really react quickly to feedback, to work. We were all working together from home, and kind of shrinking the space of that collaboration was really, really powerful with this one. Also animating-wise, the first part, they really wanted a very kind of fast-paced lighting animation in the virtual space, in the extended space. I actually worked on that number. So again, I've done this before, animating that in a traditional sort of 2D software or 3D software, even with modifiers and everything. It can be quick, but the way that we could do it real time with Notch was really, really powerful. And I think it was my first experience also working remotely using real-time technology, which was really an eye-opening experience. Since then, I know Frey, and I have also worked with the same sort of setup, also with Unreal Engine and with Plastic SCM, and I think it's really opening so many doors to be able to work remotely from different places, collaborate on the same project. There's less redundancy, and you kind of get to that final product faster as well. Just play a little bit of it. This is sort of that part where I was creating some of the virtual lights with modifiers, and this will touch on the next point, which is again the integration between lighting and video and how they're kind of bridging and kind of communicating with each other very much. But yeah, that was a really great project to be a part of. So yeah, on that note, that's the second part of this and the last part of what I will be discussing. So this whole process of real-time technologies is really bringing video designers and lighting designers together, as I've mentioned a couple times. We're able to set up things in Notch and in Unreal for lighting designers to control from their lighting desk. They're also able to control different elements. As you saw from the J Balvin example, we're also creating virtual lighting and animating that then lighting designers are reacting to. So this conversation is becoming a lot more yeah, it's kind of bridging that space in between. And it feels less of a kind of a reactionary or kind of like somebody from one department kind of feeding off on the other. It's really becoming a more kind of holistic collaboration. Just so that you know, I did have a little bit of a lighting experience. I'm by no means a lighting designer, but I have designed some shows lighting-wise. And I've also done like a permanent light installation, which embedded LED that was running with a software called Magic. So I do have some background with lighting, so it was really interesting as I started to get into real time 4 years ago to then bring it into visuals and content, which was kind of my traditional field. I'll speak about this example again, Baldo XR concert again. I was working with Doug Green, he was the lighting director for this. And it was really powerful to integrate the virtual lights that were being used in the virtual space and also the physical lights and kind of chain them together so that they would be reflecting and also casting light on Baldo at different times. This has been done before, but I think that to be able to do it on a smaller scale, again, with an Arts Council project is really, really powerful. Also, creatively, it really allowed for a scene like the one on the right that was sort of like a brutalist section that had a lot of incidental lighting. So trying to find really clever ways of having that virtual light hitting the 3D virtual elements in real time, and then also casting light on Baldo and having that conversation with Doug literally sitting next to me. Such an intimate and sort of small team way. It was really, really powerful to come up with something different. This is a project I did this year with Emil Frederick for the band Gangs of Youth. It was for their arena tour in Australia, and Emil had a great idea. That in the back is, of course, the LED screens, but he had the great idea of having this more kind of structural, architectural background where we were animating the lights in Notch, and then they would be powered through Disguise Media Server, and they would be chained as well to the physical light. And so same idea, but I think the application is still so fertile, and I think in this way, Emil, as a creative director, we were discussing it, and I was doing like the Notch design and some other video content design. It was interesting for us to have that conversation and kind of then have that conversation with the lighting designer that then he spoke to later, and kind of have that idea of a very light-driven scene that was kind of decided in content. So that was really interesting. This is just an example of one of the first versions of that to kind of showcase how the different lighting would take place. And that's some stills as well. Another scene, I created some sort of a 3D geometry in the screens as well in Notch that were running real time, and they kind of became like architectural extensions of the set, and they were being lit as well. So that was another conversation with the lighting designer to kind of incorporate those two worlds together. Another way that Notch was used in this case, those lights that you see in the background, those are actually from the content, from the real-time content. So it's like we're almost coming up with different fixtures as well that then in communication and in collaboration with the lighting designer kind of become a different element of the scene. They were very kind of driven to the beat and moving really fast, and then they were working with the foreground lights that were hitting the performers and all working in unison. I'm going to speak about Azimuth again. Again, we collaborated with Frey, and we collaborated with Cassius Creative, and we gave him control of a few things on the content that was running real time over the 2-day period. We gave him control of the color mostly, and also fading power as well. And that was really powerful. Again, we didn't have enough time to both work together and look through the content from start to finish to really kind of honed every little detail. So it has made the whole process very intuitive and very quick. And I think something else to mention about this that it's really good to think through in advance, again, what parameters you're going to be giving the lighting designers. I think some of them are better, things that are for motion or things that are doing transformations, that they happen in disguise, that they're keyframed there, they're driven by something else, or in a MIDI device or an OSC. It feels that, at least for this project in particular, it was really good to just give them color control so that lighting could focus on what they were doing, and really kind of put the whole scene together as well. I think something else to mention about this, even though it has been done before, I'm still finding that in the production process for a live show, it's still not really taken into account if you propose it. There needs to be that time for the lighting department and the video department to sit down and discuss about this workflow, how you're going to patch everything, test it. Also, in this case, we're in a festival, so there were multiple lighting desks coming in and out. There was a master lighting desk, but then you also have to think, okay, which sections are you going to give control to lighting and which you're not? Because if there's a change of a lighting desk in the middle of it and it's been controlling the colors, then that color will go to a default value. So yeah, scenes like this, even more graphical scenes, they could have control of the colors as well. And then the last example I would speak about is one that Frey did. I didn't work on this, but I think it would be really good to discuss this one as well. It's for Glass Animals, for a gig. They did 2 gigs in New York for this. It was called Dreamland IRL. Adam Young worked on this from Frey, and I think it's a really powerful way of also using real-time technology for lighting and also really wide resolutions. This was 15,000 pixels, as he told me. This was run on Unreal Engine as well, Unreal Engine 5, and with the new Lumens technology. So they were able to give control to the lighting desk as well of all the different lighting fixtures, and in this really wide canvas. And the lighting designer and lighting programmer were able to really kind of sequence this from start to finish in a very time-driven, time code-based show. And it looks really, really beautiful as well. And that's it. I just saw I have 19 seconds, so good timing. It's not that I got to practice that much. But I did want to just say very quickly a few final thoughts. Again, it's really, really amazing to be presenting here with everybody. And I also wanted to kind of ask a question. Okay, we're going faster. We're able to do more faster. And just kind of, I think some good thoughts about that would be, okay, what do we do with this extra time? I mean, obviously, we want to do even more ambitious things. We want to create even better things, continue to experiment and evolve the craft. But I think it's also an invitation to use that extra time for other things. And I was reading Framework's kind of mission statement. And I think it'd be really good to use that time to kind of tackle things in the industry that are good to kind of think, kind of people coming into the industry or kind of bringing in different diversity. And I think finally also a life-work balance. I know we all love what we do, otherwise we wouldn't be here, but I think it does require like really long days, and I think it's okay to use real-time technology to also benefit us in that sense. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Great. We have some time for questions.
Also, by the way, before anybody asks any questions, do feel free to shout and say how real-time technology is kind of also helping your projects. You know, even if it's something very brief, I think it'd be really good to hear that as well.
Over here, can we get, just wait for the microphone.
What did you use for the facial capture for the metahumans? Was it AR kit or?
I can't remember. It was an app that I downloaded on the App Store. I can tell you after, but it's one of many, which is kind of crazy that it's just so readily available. It's right there, but yeah.
Yeah, because it looked quite good, and when I've used AR kit, I thought it was a lot clunkier, so I thought
yeah, no, yeah.
Better out there.
Maybe this is a version I have. I'll check it out after, but yeah, that was it.
when you are exposing parameters for lighting to control,
Yeah.
do you ever find yourself trying to standardize that, or because all those
Trying to
events
what?
are trying to standardize that between events, or do you find that these specific production scenarios are so different that you sort of have to reinvent the wheel every time?
Actually, working with Frey especially and working with Kira, we've kind of come up with a standardized way that we set up all of our notch blocks in the ways of how we group them in terms of the number of values, and that applies to lighting as well. We try and make a different group just for them. We try and give them a value from 0 to 1 unless they request something else, like 0 to 255 or something like that, if they want different color control. But we standardize it, and so far it's good. I think in the end, on the other side, as I like to say, they don't really care as long as it works for them in a similar way as how they're using it. So, yeah.
I was actually going to say something during Chris's presentation as well, but you put it on your slide also, so it's a good question, is at NotchCon a couple of years ago, we all had a big rousing talk about real-time design versus real-time rendering. And I think it's really interesting that in your presentation there, it also says real-time design. I'm curious if you feel there's any difference when you're designing something in a real-time fashion versus, and knowing it's going to be rendering, like, is there a thought process that's different, or is there an element of time or care to detail or something like that? It's an interesting sort of difference of, if it's being rendered in real time, you can't choose if it's going to be an elephant or a mountain with a click of a button. You have to choose that ahead of time. So how does the actual design process change for you?
And you mean in the same software, be it being Notch on Unreal, just knowing that it's going to be real time or rendered, how that changes my thought process? Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think so much about optimization if I'm doing rendering time, which is great. It's something else, but I think, yes, I think if I'm doing something for real time, it's really important to think about what values are going to be exposed, about really real time kind of playback. I think it's really important if you're kind of showing clients work in progresses that you don't send them something, if it's going to be for real time, something that with a really high finishing that was done on Cinema 4D with a redshift, and at the same time, you know, don't do things in Notch or Unreal Engine that would also look in a way that wouldn't play back. I think it's about like surprising them along the way and kind of showing them something that will run in real time and then surprise them the next step as you kind of do a mini proof of concept. So I think it does become a little bit more of like a modular process as you're working for real time. I think for rendering, it's less concerned with that, but thinking more about rendering times and also how you're going to do that whole rendering pipeline in terms of naming, of terms of screens and different mappings. And I think kind of laying out that whole rendering pipeline is really something to think about then.
Thank you for sharing. Do you think that there is a danger between real-time design or real-time rendering forcing us to make designs that become more a virtual fixture than anything else? Because the more you're talking about the length of content that you have to cover for a particular gig, the more it turns into a plethora of fixtures. So are we afraid, or do we welcome that kind of lighting design speak coming into the video world?
I think we welcome it. I think it's just a different branch of content making. I think something that's, as everybody knows, I think certain projects will call for a more traditional pipeline and a very high-end rendering, and for the sort of content making that will be displayed in a more kind of narrative, short narrative, and kind of very kind of sequenced, animated sort of a thing. I think there will always be a place for that, I think. I think it's only a good thing that we're expanding and kind of the lines between content and fixture kind of continue to blend. I think in a proposal process, I think it's always good to pitch these new things that are kind of coming up fixture-based, but also continue to push for other ideas that will involve more traditional content as well. So, but it'll really based on the idea and things like that. So I think also on my end, it might get, I think we're always kind of trying to see how we can evolve content and make it differently. It might be that, you know, we see this kind of more fixture-based content, and we want to do something a little bit different. So how can that be something that can't be done with like traditional lighting and things like that? I think pushing that limit is interesting to me, but it's a really good question and something to think of along the way.
How do you deal with the communication with perhaps like more non-technical clients who might be making requests who can't understand? Obviously, with real-time content, we have the ability to make changes and immediately see them. But how do you communicate the difference between changes which can be made immediately and ones which are something is you're going to have to go away and then reconsider how you're approaching the patch or the block you've created?
Yeah, I think it's really good to kind of definitely keep the client's expectations in a healthy state, from what I found. I think it's always good to kind of pick and choose your battles, and I think kind of preempting that as you go along the way, kind of foreseeing what those changes might be, and then having some like low-hanging fruits that you can give the client while the other stuff is, that might take a little bit more time. That's a good approach. I think, at least from my experience, I think it's not necessarily good to spell everything out of what will take what, as long as you're kind of keeping the process going and meeting deliverables, except if it's something really specific that the expectations are for a certain level, or the studio itself wants to make something really particular. I think then it would be good to have a call and kind of explain it to them in a really kind of, spelled that way. Yeah, definitely.
Who in your experience has the final call, lights or video?
I'm sorry?
Who in your experience has the final call, lights or video?
Well,
Can you repeat the question? So,
yeah, so you're asking, I'm sorry, what's her name?
My name is Ollie.
Ollie's asking, who has the final call, lighting or video? That was the question, right? Well, I think from my experience so far throughout the years, it does seem that lighting has a lot to say, because video has kind of creeped into the live industry. Not so recently anymore, but that's the way that it's happened. And I think video is considered a source of lighting. So especially in more traditional shows that I've worked on in theater and musicals, that sort of tends to be the thing. But I think the beauty about the video lighting and lighting design, kind of video design and lighting design coming together and kind of really working shoulder to shoulder, sharing fixtures in the virtual space and in the physical space, and having a conversation that feels very much like I was working with Doug on Baldo. I think it's really kind of showing that a great idea can come from either of the two creative sides. And so it's less about how that hierarchy should go, and it's more about how we can make the product better. And I do think real-time technology is helpful for that.
thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.